although it never quite equals that. So it asymptotically approaches the relative risk of one, but never quite gets there. So the risk in former smokers persists, although it certainly improves over 20 years. Okay, so what have epidemiologists accomplished? I'm a little overwhelmed with the idea of kind of going over what epidemiologists have accomplished. But I'll just tell you that LaCroix coffee is not associated with any particular cancers or adverse effects, as mentioned by Neil Friedman. Smoking is associated with bladder cancer. There's been a lot of studies, breast implants, Chernobyl, oral mouthwash. A lot of studies have been no. In other words, cell phones are not strongly associated with brain tumors, although I understand there's some new data coming out which may show some small associations. But this is probably an area where the radiation epidemiology group gets the most calls. People are most worried about cell phones. But probably the big worry was for cell phones over 10 years ago when they had a lot more emissions than they do today. In general, although modern epidemiology has identified the general and specific causes of cancer and remain as advocates of public health, the identification of tobacco as the major causal factor for lung cancer and 7 other major tumors, all those difficult to treat, and the role of secondary tobacco smoke. So I will just spend a second on secondary tobacco smoke and realize that the discovery that secondary tobacco smoke was associated with a number of cancers and other conditions is what allowed clean air legislation to go forward, and means that when you get on an airplane, or you go in a movie theater, or you go to a restaurant, you don't have to breathe in other people's smoke. And so you're saved from not only that risk, but the annoyance of being exposed to all of that. And that also contributed to a social milieu that makes smoking less acceptable, and in turn makes the per capita rate of smoking less go down. So there's an enormous public service that came from those epidemiologic studies. Okay, the general risk factors for cancer, though, are age, as we like to say, E and G, and combinations of E and G. Tobacco is still the biggie. Diet is going down in importance, and there's I would say, a crisis in nutritional epidemiology. And it's worth just taking 30 seconds to tell you about this, in that most of the studies of dietary factors reported to be either protective or risk factors for cancer have proven to be challenging and difficult. The hope now is by using molecular epidemiology techniques, that is biomarkers, like your techniques like metabolomics, we'll figure out a mechanistic basis to understand some of the associations. So there is data, and for instance, IARC data, that still supports a weak association of meat consumption, red meat consumption with some cancers, and a weak protective effect of fruit and vegetables on a number of cancers. But most of the associations with individual nutrients, like B vitamins, have kind of washed out and don't seem to be present. So it's been really tough to prove nutritional associations with cancer. And a newer generation of studies will be needed to prove them. That said, most cancer is due to the environment, and evidence for this is that there are dramatic differences in rates of different cancers in different countries. So melanoma, between the highest, which is Australia, and the lowest, which is Japan, the ratio is over 100. Now, some of this is due to genetics. And so you may say, well, wait a minute, if it's due to genetics, how do you know it's genetics or the environment? How do you know that? So a component is due to genetics, but we know from migration studies where people of one group go to another country, typically, when that happens, they acquire the rate fairly rapidly of the new country. So this occurs with most cancers, and I'll tell you one or two exceptions. For instance, breast cancer and prostate cancer. Within a generation, if Asians migrate to San Francisco, they acquire the rates of cancer of the United States within a few decades. And there's one or two examples where that's not the case. For instance, chronic lymphocytic leukemia. The chronic lymphocytic leukemia, which is the most common adult leukemia, has no known extrinsic environmental causes, but it has some strong genetic causes, so that may be an exception. Here's an example of an environmental cause. We'll look at the maps. Jianwei province in China, and the country-specific mortality rates based on a map where it's super high. And when you go there, what do you see? Well, they have indoor ovens that create incredible levels of indoor pollutants. So they have ovens underneath the beds called tangs that they use for heating, and those smoky coal ovens result in extremely high rates of lung cancer in that province. And the cancer maps also showed a high rate in Montana, and I had a map here. That slide somehow dropped out. But there was a copper smelter that contaminated the area with arsenic, and that accounted for a high rate of lung cancer around the smelter in Montana. And when we removed the smelter, the rates went down. So this is just a reminder that tobacco's a bad guy. And I think I told you a little bit. I told you enough about tobacco, so I'm not going to go on and on about it. One good thing about tobacco in the United States is that after the Surgeon General report and all of the public health consequences, the rates of smoking in the United States have steadily declined. And that's a combination of individual knowledge, but also public health efforts and social efforts. So the disease rates continue to fall, and the rate of adult smokers in the United States is now below 20%. Still low, rather shockingly high. We think that still something just under 1 in 5 U.S. adults still smokes. And worldwide, as I said, we are anticipating 1 billion deaths in the next century from smoking. And most of that is because the tobacco companies have exported their industry to developing countries like India and China. And I told you a little bit about environmental tobacco smoke, so I won't separate on this too much. Okay, alcohol is the number 2 carcinogen, and it's associated with a number of different cancers. The 5 top ones are oral, pharynx, esophagus, larynx, and liver, and there's some interactions with smoking. And ionizing radiation is also a big extrinsic cause. I'm going to move ahead to say a word about some newer studies, and I'll skip over some of these because I think this is material you can go over and certainly look up more on your own if you're interested. So Chernobyl, non-ionizing radiation is a major cause of skin cancer and aging of the skin. Infections are an emerging cause of cancer, and investigation of the microbiome is a extremely important area. HPV, over the last year, investigator in our group sequenced the HPV virus, and that's an extraordinary finding and discovery, and what it's showing is that some characteristics of the virus contribute to carcinogenicity, so they're getting a lot more about that in the literature. Fusobacterium is prevalent in colorectal carcinoma, and I think that you're going to see a lot of discoveries with regard to colorectal carcinoma as a number of studies of the fecal microbiome mature. And there's a lot in occupational epidemiology. And I mentioned the usual suspects. Okay, so what are some challenges? So on the environmental side, for a number of cancers, we still know nothing about the risk factors. So we don't really understand much about the risk factors for example, as I mentioned, chronic lymphocytic leukemia. Also, beyond a few risk factors, for example, for breast cancer, hormonal factors, and alcohol, we don't really understand the risk factors for many common cancers. So I mentioned breast, but really prostate's a better example. Age and family history. Beyond that, not so much is known about the risk factors of prostate cancer. How genes and environment work together is not well understood, and many of the potential causes are poorly studied. Okay, I mentioned chronic lymphocytic leukemia. I mentioned some of the challenges in nutritional epidemiology. I don't have time to go into a lot of the issues with diet, but believe me, that could also be a whole talk. In our study in Italy that I told you about earlier, we did look at fresh, red, and processed meat intake and did show a dose response. And probably the most consistent finding in nutritional epidemiology is that the more red and processed meat you eat over a variety of cancers, the more your risk increases. So treating meat as a condiment is probably not a bad idea. So is the answer genetics? Yes and no. For common cancers, GWAS studies show that there are numerous genes associated with virtually every cancer. However, the risk associated with each one is small. And the big issue is that when you put all those small risks, by small, I mean a relative risk of 1.1 to 1.3. So when you put a risk factor of 1.3 in a risk model, and you take 3 or 4 or 5 of them, and you put them all in there, what happens? Unfortunately, not too much. It doesn't increase the risk a great deal. So it hasn't proven extraordinarily helpful. Has it taught us a lot about the mechanism? Well, a little bit, but not so much. We still have a ways to go on the genetic side as well. However, one thing that is well established is that virtually all cancer is associated with genetic changes in the tumor. And in fact, our group, our division, is establishing a new group to characterize those genetic changes in tumor. One problem, though, is that to do a good job in sequencing tumor, you really need fresh tumor. And fresh tumor is not always available. In fact, unless your study takes liquid nitrogen and has it in the operating room when the fresh tumor is obtained, sequencing can be difficult because it's hard to do it from parent sections. So this is something that the next generation of studies will have to be established to collect. The other thing you need, if you're going to do this, is very good covariate data. So there are questions with breast tissue, but many times they don't have the covariate data. You really want that good exposure data in addition to the good clinical data and the high-quality tissue to do these kind of studies. Okay, so I'm not going to go into the details of genetic studies, but there are studies that focus on germline, and there are studies that focus on tumor tissue, and there are family and population studies, and there are studies that look at everything, agnostic studies, and there are studies that look at specific candidate genes. Virtually every tumor has a genetic component, and this is shown by one example in lung cancer. Every study, when you look carefully at family history, tends to show excess risk associated with family members with cancer. And here's an example of 1.57, or about a 60% increased risk if you have a first-degree relative with cancer, after adjusting for every other risk factor. Okay. So, I'm going to skip over some of the genetics and just tell you, touch on two more topics. What is molecular epidemiology? Well, traditional epidemiology started out just by relating exposures to disease. So how many people smoked? How many cases of controls got lung cancer? We do some simple calculations and determine if there's an association. Molecular epidemiology, though, includes an assessment of genes, uses biomarkers to assess internal dose, early biological effect, intermediate markers that assess altered structure or function, and maybe tries to get early disease, and takes all of these markers into account. So this is the idea of molecular epidemiology, which emerged about 2 decades ago. As I said, we did a lung cancer case control study where we actually got the tumor, put it in liquid nitrogen, gave it to the pathologist with section piece of tumor, and we put it immediately in liquid nitrogen. We paired this with a questionnaire that gathered all that covariate data. And so, for example, when we looked at the information on heat, we would assess things like doneness, because there was data that suggested that the amount of heterocyclic amines in heat was related to the time and temperature that you took meat. So burnt meat had a lot more heterocyclic amines. So to address this question, we would assess how people would respond on the questionnaire to how they cooked their meat. So looking at a picture. So molecular epidemiology accomplished a lot of things. Examples showed HPV was the cause of 100% of cervical cancer. Before they actually were able to assess HPV, they would get associations with, for example, number of sexual partners. So that was a good piece of information that suggested that, an infectious agent could be working here. But actually sequencing the virus established this in a much better way. Another study showed that cutting down on smoking is ineffective. Why? Because biomarker studies showed that you would alter the topography of how you smoke in a way that you still absorb the same amount of carcinogens. Why? Because you're addicted. You're addicted to nicotine. So your body alters the way you inhale the cigarette smoke so that you still get the same amount of carcinogens. And of course, GWAS studies were all based on biomarkers. Okay, and then there's integrative epidemiology that adds behavior, like that time for cigarettes that I told you about, and outcome. So not only do we look at disease, but we look at whether people survive. So that's the term integrative epidemiology. It's kind of added on to molecular epidemiology when you add behavior and outcome. Okay. And a lot of these studies are done in consortia. And the consortia tries to harmonize the different questionnaires by using online resources like Benex. I've almost used my hour, so I'm going to take 2 more minutes and then stop and let you ask a few questions. Just to tell you that there's a lot of exposure areas that have not been able to be studied with traditional approaches. And I'm just going to mention these because these are kind of the future. So one is sleep, and traditional questionnaires tended to ignore sleep. But sleep is incredibly important. And the new generation of apps that many of you probably have, like the Fitbits, automatically report sleep. And it provides a wealth of data. And length of sleep and timing of sleep is clearly associated with the number of conditions. So this is an area being explored. Physical activity and inactivity is also super important, and there's a recent study that showed associations with cancer. Very difficult to collect information in a questionnaire, but again, these Fitbits and other devices can collect information. Heart rate, both resting heart rate